Thank you so much, Linda. The time is 7:13 on February the 23rd. I'd like to call this Environmental Advisory Committee to order. First thing is the appointment of the chair and vice chair. It's something that is electively rotated annually if that's something we would like to do. So with the committee's consent, may we deal with the each of these separately. And I guess I'm going to ask, is there anybody nominated for the position of chair for the year 2022 of the Environmental Advisory Committee? If anybody would like to step up, that's great. If not, I'm happy to continue on. Is somebody want to be chair for the remainder of the year? Any nominations? And you can nominate yourself as well.
Rachel, the remainder of the year is how many meetings? It's like only a few meetings.
4 or 5. I mean, maybe 5, 6. There's usually about six meetings a year. So I guess this may be 5. But would it change at the end of the term, the election term?
Yeah, it's with EAC.
And then
we stop, and we could stop in the summer.
Summer, and may have one in September.
Maybe.
Excuse me, Madam Chair. Yes, we only have 2 more meetings after tonight, so they end in June.
I nominate Councillor Gilland to continue for 2 more meetings.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Gardner. Any other nominators? No? Okay, may I have, okay, so Wendy, if you're going to nominate me, I don't know if I could, I'm not sure if I can move and second that. Am I allowed, Linda, or is that, do I have to pass?
Well, excuse me, through you, Madam Chair. Yes, we would need a seconder on that.
Okay, so can I get a seconder on that? Sam? Perfect. Okay, so all those in favor? Opposed? That carries. Perfect. Thank you very much, everybody. Appreciate that.
Have a vice chair?
Now we're going to elect the vice chair.
Okay.
So it's the exact same thing. If there's any nominations for the position of vice chair for the remainder of the year, is there any nominators for vice chair? Councillor Gardner currently sits as vice chair.
Well, if somebody wants, I mean, then you can put it on your resume that you were vice chair. I'm willing to give it up. Seriously. Is anybody running for politics?
Is anybody wanting to give it a try? I know that I've been here, vice chair's rule. Essentially, you know, if the chair is not available, then you would kind of step in and kind of take over those duties if I couldn't come.
Does anybody need it on their resume? Seriously, does anybody need this on their resume?
Okay, I'm going to nominate Councillor Gardner then, because it's I feel like everybody's okay with the next 2 meetings we have left.
Okay.
You know, maybe it's something in the next term. Maybe if you guys decide to be on the committee again, that you feel like you want to step up. So I'm going to nominate Councillor Gilliland. No. Am I allowed to move that, Linda, or am I not allowed to move that as chair?
You're nominating me. You're having trouble. You're having trouble with G last names, Rachel.
What did I say?
Councillor Gilliland.
You want both jobs.
I'm so sorry. This is like a late day for me.
The late night for us.
If I may ask the clerk, am I allowed to nominate Councillor Gardner as vice chair, as the chair speaking, or does somebody else have to do that?
I'll nominate Councillor Gardner.
Okay.
Thank you, Colin. Better just to do it that way.
I think it's better that way. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Colin.
Okay, so Colin's going to move Councillor Gardner as vice chair. Can I get a seconder, please? Ryan? Perfect. All right, I'll call the vote if there's no other nominators. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. Perfect. Okay, so now we can get started with the approval of the agenda. May I have a motion to approve the agenda as circulated by Legislative Services? Can I get somebody to move that, please? Ryan, second by Barry. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. Any declarations of pecuniary interest at all? Seeing none. Okay, so minutes. May I have a motion to receive the minutes of November 21st. Hopefully you guys have had a chance to peek at it. Anybody want to move that? Sam and Ryan, perfect. Any comments or questions on the minutes at all? Seeing none. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. Okay, so that leaves us with the matters of consideration. We're going to go to 6.1, which is the memorandum from Senior Policy Planner Green Development Standards Update. This is a very exciting one. Phase 1 planned implementation. If I could get a mover and seconder to put the item on the floor for discussion. Councillor Gartner, second by. Just need somebody to second it. Colin, perfect. All right, does staff, Matthew, would you like to speak to this item, please?
Sure. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Perfect.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having us back, or me back, representing my team. I'm going to put up my screen very quickly because I'm excited to share the first look at our web form. So the purpose of this update is that we have since toggled to an online form. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, perfect. So I'll preface this by saying this is the first iteration of transferring the paper criteria onto the web page. So it is very basic and very, I would say, unexciting at this point in terms of intuitiveness. But the meat and potatoes have been integrated. So what we've done since we've met last is we've taken the criteria that hasn't changed since we've met last. There's been a couple subtle tweaks in terms of the specific GDS criteria, which you would have seen in the handbook that was attached as an appendix, but we've basically pivoted to this online form. The idea is that a prospective applicant will come in, they'll fill out their contact criteria, information about their project. They'll go through these criteria, answer honestly. They'll be also submitting basically almost like a disclosure saying, you know, we've answered honestly and truthfully. That will be able to be downloaded. It'll also be sent to the planning clerk. They'll be required to submit that as part of a complete application. And then once the development planner on file receives this, they'll be able to follow up with each of the staff review parties to verify anything. So the attached handbook that's attached as an appendix hasn't actually been completely updated yet. We're just waiting for one more quick round of commenting from Build, who we've been in touch with fairly regularly over the last 3 months. I'm expecting a call from one member, they told me, but they didn't have any significant feedback. Obviously, Build and the development community is probably the most interested party in the GDS. And so we've taken their feedback seriously. The main comment they had from the first round of criteria was that they were looking for a pilot. And we're not calling this a pilot, but what we've done is, in speaking with our legal counsel at the town, we've decided to try to put through the GDS as part of the pre-consultation bylaw, so that they have to submit these requirements. And then once we integrate incentives as part of phase 2, which ideally would be in a year's time, and once we've gone through the rhythms of collecting all these pieces of information from developers, we'll introduce a bylaw that actually requires them to follow pretty to the point in terms of each of the actual rules. So right now, we really just want to smooth into it and hope that we receive all of these pieces of information. And what I've said to Build in my responses to some of their feedback is, you know, if there's something that can't be met, so an example would be EV. If they can't actually get this many, I don't know, a certain amount of conduit because of the grid capacity or something like that, then we would work with that developer to up another area of the GDS. They're not going to be off the hook, but we'll work together. And part of that flexibility is not including a bylaw for phase 1 in terms of absolutely following the criteria line by line. And I know it may sound a little wishy-washy, but I've been through this in Brampton. And the most important thing is getting that buy-in and that transition with the development community and get them to start giving us all this information. And then we can get into the nitty-gritty with incentives. So that's really the impetus of today's update. There's going to be heavy staff training. We're going to do a full-blown communications plan. We're going to council with this update a little further along in March, the 22nd, I believe. And the plan is that would be our last update before we initiate phase 1. So we're going to propose a go live date, likely at first it was June 1, but apparently there's a bunch of development charges that are being introduced as of July 1st. So we might compile all of this with those changes just for the development community, getting everything kind of at once and doing things a little differently at once. And so the goal is probably July 1st, go live. And then we'll circle back within a year after we do some cost benefit analysis, see how things go, and then get our incentives ready. And we've also asked Build to work with us on some of the incentives that they would be most interested in order for them to be more inclined and excited about the GDS. So that's the quick and dirty update, and I'm happy to take any questions or feedback.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the presentation. If I may, Matthew, I know that there was also a presentation within the actual report. Was there anything you wanted to point to with that as well, with any changes? Because I know this was presented to the committee before. This is the second time we're seeing this. Was there anything within that specific report that you wanted to speak to?
I think just the wholesomeness of the handbook. So what we've done is really grown the handbook to include kind of instructions on what's being submitted, what team is reviewing it, what it applies to, the specific criteria. So you'll see in the handbook, I think I have it open here. Anyway, you can look through it, but we've really extended it so that it's kind of an all-encompassing handbook essentially, but on the web page. So where I'm kind of pointing, hold on, I'm trying to figure out how to minimize this. So where we have these subsections, we're going to be hyperlinked to each specific section in the corresponding handbook so that, you know, these aren't just questions listed on a page. You can hot link and something will pop up that'll say, okay, this is the meaning behind this. This is how you demonstrate that you've kind of adhered to that specific criteria or not. And so it's going to be very interactive. And I think that's the biggest change since we've met last. The criteria themselves haven't changed, very little, if anything.
Thank you, Matthew. And so just for clarity for the group, so strictly what you're looking for is comments back from the committee, specifically in regards to the implementation of the GDS or the Green Development Standards process. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. And just for clarity for the committee, and just because some people might not know or understand, if you could kind of speak to the pre-consultation stage and what that means, just to kind of help everybody have some comments back on that specific area, I think that would be helpful. And then I'll turn it over to the committee for questions and comments. Absolutely.
So in terms of pre-consultation in the planning world, when a developer comes through with a proposed development, the first thing that happens is an initial meeting that says, okay, this is what we're going to need from you in terms of plans, drawings, documents, technical studies, liaising, fees, all of the things that they'll be needed to do from A to Z. And the pre-consultation bylaw outlines those requirements for the developer. So one, like I mentioned quickly, we're going to be working with legal to put in wording for the GDS as part of that bylaw, where I'm 99% sure the green report, which is like a very simplified version of the GDS prior to us doing this work, is already a part of that pre-consultation meeting. But I'm going to be a part of these meetings, and we're going to tell the developers about, and in addition to the communication pieces we're going to be sending out, but basically we're going to lay out how to adhere to the GDS, how to go through the web page, how to download the document, how to submit it, and then how we will follow up with them in terms of ensuring that they've met the mandatory criteria and the optional criteria. And then once they've had that pre-con meeting, usually they'll come back sometimes very quickly, sometimes in a few months with everything that they need, completed studies, and then the actual application review starts. And that's kind of drawn out depending on how quick the developer wants to get things done.
Thank you, Matthew. I wish we had the link within the memoranda or the agenda initially, just so we could have had a bit of an advanced look. but hopefully everybody's got the gist. So just to be clear, the recommendation is that the memorandum regarding the green development standards update phase 1 plan implementation to be received. So it's specifically speaking to the implementation. And then also that the environmental advisory committee comments regarding the green development standards update phase 1 plan implementation be received and referred to staff for further consideration and action as appropriate. So I just wanted to make that clear. So does anybody have any questions or comments on this at all? I'm going to turn it over to the committee. And I just don't see the whole screen here. So
I have a quick question. It's Ryan.
Ryan. Okay, perfect. Go ahead, Ryan.
Sorry, so I unfortunately missed the last meeting. So is the intent for a developer, anyone that's building something, to fill this form out whenever they want to proceed with the project?
Matthew?
Through you, Chair. That's exactly it. So any new development, this will be a required piece of information that's collected. And within the GDS, so in addition to this kind of list, there are materials that will be also included that have to be, that are associated with the question. So for example, if we say, show a reduction in surface runoff, there'll be drawings and pieces of material that when the engineering team looks at that application, they'll be able to verify those pieces. So that's where the handbook comes into it as well. It outlines those specific requirements and yeah, every new development and redevelopment would have to go through this web page, but through the GDS program essentially.
Okay. And if they are building something that's very environmentally friendly, are there any incentives or is there any benefits to them for doing that?
Yeah,
Ryan?
good question.
Matthew, go ahead.
Sorry, I forget the process sometimes in these. Through you, Chair. That's exactly it. So phase 1, and I should have prefaced this in my opening statement, the outcomes of phase 1 are really to understand kind of the intricacies of the GDS program, what is working, what is not, what is feasible, what is not. And through phase 1, we're going to be looking at the outcomes in terms of incentives and what will most benefit the development community. So right now we've kind of said, throw these things into your submission package. We're going to review them. I think we'll automatically, as staff, work closely with developers that are obviously very much excited about the GDS. One of the things I've said to Build is that, we want you to market these environmentally conscious developments because they should be attractive to new buyers as well. Inadvertently, that's an incentive in and of itself because you're building something that can attract, people that are conscious of environmental development. But phase 2 is where we're looking at specific fiscal programs. We're looking at attaching awards and things like lead designations to certain things for certain monetary benefits. We're looking at tying benefits to the community improvement plan through the promenade. So definitely there'll be incentives in phase 2, like hard monetary ones. And that's why phase 2 is sort of designed to be much more rigorous and intensive in terms of what's being done. We're pushing the envelope even more than we are now. And I would say comfortably, I have a background in environmental management, that we are pushing the envelope in certain areas of our GDS now. It isn't just something that's kind of like check the box and move on with your development. We've pushed some areas a little higher than some of the other municipal government GDS examples that we've looked at. But once phase 2 gets much more intensified in terms of what's required, that's where we'll be tying those fiscal incentives.
Ryan?
Thanks.
Perfect. And what's the timeline for the incentives phase 2?
Good question. Through you, Chair. We're looking at a year right now, and that'll give us some time to do some of the cost benefit analysis. It ties even to the natural asset piece that's later on in this agenda today, looking at some of those benefits and having that very fiscal evidence of how it's working. We want to see progression in terms of scoring over the next year. What are the scores like from the first few months of implementation, and then later in the year are the developments scoring much higher on some of the mandatory pieces. So how it works is there's tier 1 and tier 2 as part of phase 1, and tier 1 is mandatory requirements, and tier 2 there's some flexibility. So it's like if you're going to do EV for a minimum of however many percentage of spaces for your project in tier 2 of that same phase, we're going to say you have to do that 10 times more or 2 or 3 times more. Obviously, what makes sense, EV is maybe not the best example of that, but it's sort of a magnified version of the same criteria. But then they'd have to do kind of 2 of 5. And I apologize that I didn't share the link. The link is actually not live to, I don't think, anyone but myself in IT right now. So I don't know if it would work. It's a preview mode, but I'm happy to share that afterwards. And if anyone wants to contact me and walk through things, happy to do that as well.
Thank you, Matthew. I really appreciate it. I was going to suggest that just so we could at least give some constructive feedback. I know we're looking at this now and it looks great on the surface, but there could be some things that, we've missed just in this presentation. So I do appreciate that. So if you could share that, that would be great. And if anybody wants to get back to Matthew and share some feedback, I'm sure that we would really appreciate your expertise and your comments back on that. And if I may request as well, just for Ryan's sake and maybe some others as well, if maybe you could put the link to the draft that will be submitted to council of the GDS document just for reference.
Yep.
That'd be great. Ryan, do you have any more follow-up questions?
No, thank you so much, Matthew, for the background. Appreciate it.
Perfect. Colin?
Yes. Matthew, I really like the questions. I think they're excellent. I'm wondering, is anyone going to inspect to see that the answers are accurate to what they're doing?
Matthew?
Through you, Chair. Great question, Colin. So right now, what we've said is we will be asking staff to technically follow up on some of these things. I think when we went through the criteria with the stakeholders, including LSRCA and all of our engineering team, we made sure what we were asking for was visible on most of the major engineering requirements. Like, for example, for water stuff, we've made sure that the things that we're asking for will be visible from planning documents at the outset of a planning application. So right away, while we're doing something like a draft plan approval, which is the first major milestone of a planning application, we would be able to see those things. There are certain things, though, that later on, for example, like plantings are one of the last things. So I think in phase 2, we would actually have to have physical inspections on site to see exactly what was planted, because landscaping is the last thing done in any project. And by the time landscaping happens, building permits have been pulled, monies have usually been paid for the most part. There are tools and mechanisms that planning teams do have in terms of holdback. So for example, street trees, when you have a house being built and your street trees is planted, there's usually a warranty, and the warranty is verified usually by the town through the developer. So the town will send out a landscape architect to inspect that they've done what they've said they were going to do on the detailed plan. And so that's a mechanism where we could indeed verify anything that's not done now, but that is something we're trying to ensure isn't kind of a loophole that can escape us. Good question though. Yeah.
Colin? Follow?
That's good. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Colin. Councillor Gardner?
Thank you. So I'm pretty sure we always do holdbacks on development projects, but they're probably not geared to this. So would there be an extra or a different kind of holdback for this?
Matthew?
Through you, Chair. Thank you. Thank you for the question. I think we would look to incorporating new types of holdbacks. There isn't anything now in place for phase 1 in terms of holdbacks, but I think we can leverage that same kind of process where I was talking about with kind of the landscape architects going in specifically for plantings. In terms of certifications and something like a LEED certification. So if we tie an incentive to something like that, you would actually be likely paying LEED or working with LEED, maybe some sort of partnership or agreement with a certification organization like LEED, where they would be going in and verifying things as well. And that's usually, a year after things have been completely finished off in a project, or even later sometimes. And that's another mechanism where we can certainly do that in terms of holding back their incentive almost.
Thank you. I think I'm mixing up planning and building. So it might be the building department that actually does the holdback. So you might not be aware of that. But the holdbacks that are in place now would be for specific things. This is a whole new area. So I guess that could be discussed maybe when it comes to council. The other thing I wanted to ask, there'll be some things like, I just saw something about toilets. So that's probably not going to be on the engineering plans. So you're going to be walking around checking for the flush of toilets.
Yeah, good question through you, Chair. I think that's a good example of something we need to think about now. And you're right. You don't know what kind of toilet. I think our metric is a fairly standard one. I don't think they even make toilets now that are more than 5 liters. I just replaced a bunch of like 35-liter toilets in my 25-year-old house.
Yeah.
So you can definitely improve. I forget what the actual metric is, but that's an example of something that we're going to need to think about on how we can, and LEED would look at something like that. Like if we did an external certification, they would do all that. They would look at glazing, they would look at air tightness. You'd be surprised that some of these criteria, like air tightness, can be measured through technical documents. We worked pretty closely with some of our building staff on some of those questions, but I'm sure there's some that'll slip. But yeah, it's a good question. I made note of it already because there are things that we need to ensure, especially if we're tying incentives to.
Counselor?
And just, I mean, it'd be onerous for staff to walk around and check all the toilets. So then, maybe they have to provide their purchase orders. I don't know, something like that.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Great idea. Thank you.
Thanks, Counselor. Anybody else? Sam?
Yeah, okay. I have a couple of thoughts on this. One, to Councillor Gartner's point, is there any way in these new developments, I'm literally spitballing, like this might be crazy, in terms of like not checking every toilet, but are they on not their own grid, but are new developments being monitored like on their own smart grid? Is their water because that might be a workaround to how like you have average home use and water use, and you should have X amount if low flush toilets are installed, for example. Anyway, just
Matthew?
Yeah, through you, Chair. That's a great question. In terms of district energy, if we saw a model, and I don't know exactly if it's feasible, but there are different types of district energy models, we would see a grid like that where you would know exactly what energy is being reused. If we're talking about energy, for example, and there's solar inputs and things like that, you would be able to see that kind of grid output, what you're taking, what you're drawing. In terms of wastewater, I think there's ways of smart metering. I don't think we have anything like that in the GDS now, but that's a great point to maybe investigate for phase 2. The actual wastewater targets. I know there are municipalities now that are actually metering wastewater because people would say, I shouldn't be just paying for my water supply ×2 for the wastewater, because people recycle water, people will do different things with water. So that's a great point. I'm going to make note of it. But there are ways in certain areas where we can see that output. EV is, I think, a good example where we might be able to say, okay, this is how much we're drawing on the grid. And this is the potential if someone has their own smart energy on their roofs or anything like that, how they're contributing back to the grid. And one of the things that Prime, our consultant, brought up, and it's in the discussion paper, is just the idea of partnering with Enbridge or partnering with Electra, whoever the utility company is, and buying into some of those programs where the developer would be able to get funding for some of these things, and then the cost isn't directly on the developer and the reward comes to the eventual buyer. But it's a great point, and I think it's something that could be useful in terms of incentives too, trying to track, because you would need those things if you want to see part of that cost benefit analysis. So good point.
Yeah, I figure it's always, if you're building completely new, there should be a way to maybe bundle things for the developer. Anyway, that was just a thought. in terms of, I'm just trying to wrap my head around this sheet we're looking at. I think the questions are great, but I'm trying to nail down the timing. So this sheet is a mix of both what hopefully will be mandatory under the GDS, as well as the optional ones. Okay. What is the timeline between? So my worry looking at this is that, is there any way to differentiate, I guess, between, or have any sort of teeth before those bylaws come into place if developers just go, no, 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 no? Are we stuck at that point? Do we have any wiggle room to say no to development in terms of, I know we do, but in terms of environmental standpoint? Or is this more just to gather the information and then decide what needs to be implemented tier 1, tier 2, like you talked about?
Matthew?
Yeah, through you, Chair. Great follow-up question. So the intention is, and I apologize, this webpage is again like the first draft and sort of just the text version of everything. But the idea is that a score will pop up, and this first area, they're not even able to proceed to the next area of the GDS. So if they don't fulfill the first area of criteria, this will effectively be incomplete. And as soon as they submit that, and as soon as we receive it on our end, it'll kind of be, smothered in red ink essentially that says, they've said no, 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 no. And if we see a document that's literally covered in kind of neglect of the GDS, I think we would go back on each thing and say, you need to improve on this, you need to improve on this. And effectively, yes, there is wording in our official plan that promotes the GDS and says that we should have one. So we do have a bit of teeth, if you will, but essentially code is what would be looked at if we went to something like a land tribunal. But and when I say land tribunal, builders can challenge our decisions on the approvals of their plans one way or another. But I think a total neglect of this would just, I think it would slow down the application. It would be a lot more back and forth, and it hurts the builder in and of itself to totally neglect the GDS. I really want to be able to be flexible. Part of phase 1, not including the hard bylaw, is to remain flexible in terms of, if this is literally not feasible for whatever reason, and we'll have our experts help us make those decisions, we want to see them up another category. And really, like I said, so phase 1 is really about the buy-in and the uptake. We really want to get the developers excited about this and on board, and work with them, and then record kind of the successes of what worked and what didn't work, and then come back with phase 2 and say, okay, this is what we can incorporate in terms of incentives. We'll have monetary incentives in certain areas. We'll have expedited approvals, hopefully in certain areas. And then it sounds harsh on a builder saying, you're going to have to incur these extra costs, but if there's benefits in terms of holdbacks being promoted or whatever, and then marketing their own product is saying, okay, look, we've installed this whole subdivision with the setups for electric vehicles or hookups for solar roofing. They might be charging a little bit more for a subdivision that isn't, for example, but that reward comes back to the buyer. So I'm hoping they really work with the marketing teams on their end to promote the GDS in terms of their actual product. But good feedback again. Like I agree with what you're saying, and we've designed it this way kind of intentionally so that we don't have the development community just saying, no, we don't have to do it and we don't care about your incentives kind of thing. That was a wishy-washy answer, but I hope you get what I mean.
Sam, any follow-up?
Yeah, that's great. I do have follow-up, of course, as always. So I threw a link in the chat just since we're live, and it's just Project Speedier in case you wanted, I don't know if you've heard about it. It's an example of a Northern partnership, solar, builders, electric, all of that stuff. Anyway, super interesting, something I'm adjacent to, but not working My only other point is with this development, I am worried, as always, as I always have been for the town of Aurora, on creating a further disparity in housing and using environmentalism to like basically further the, I don't want to call it gentrification, but further that building divide between affordable housing and eco-friendly options. Anyway, that's out of your control, but I would just like to throw that out there, that I'm always concerned about that when I see eco-centered builds, as they usually cater to a more affluent clientele.
Through you, Chair. Yeah, if I may quickly respond, that was my first concern a few weeks ago when we heard from the province that they'd be kind of, and this is my own professional opinion, I can't speak on behalf of council or my colleagues, but I was fearful, when we talked about making housing more affordable, but in change, kind of nixing some of the protections that come along with it. And as an urban planner and as someone that's passionate about the environment, there is a very fine balance, I agree, in achieving these things, but also not putting, incremental costs currently rising on certain products. And so it's something that I'm cognizant of working on the GDS, and I'm sure the entire steering committee would agree with you. It's something we need to be aware of. There are some pieces in the GDS though that speak to things like complete communities and walkability, and making sure that we're not just doing kind of very fancy environmental buildings. We're working on walkability and parks. So I think it's attainable. I think it's something we need to look at for phase 2, especially with incentives and how we can really achieve that balance, like I said. But it's a good point for sure.
Sam, any follow-up?
No, that's great. I really appreciate it. And I really do like the clarification of the scoring to have them proceed. Oh, my final thought is I'm just worried this will make more work for the town on the back end. That just often gets, as someone that works in environment, often underestimated the manpower, person power, and hours. So obviously, that working in it, but I just want to make sure that's accounted for so that these things can have follow through, like Colin said.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna say, like, so we have Natalie, the powerhouse specific to climate. And I got to tell you, a lot of municipalities haven't taken that step to actually hire that person, so we're so lucky to have her there as support specifically in this area. And of course, I mean, obviously, Matthew, you're doing a fantastic job as well, but just specific to that, that position and having that support, we're very, very fortunate for that. So I would like to think that we have town staff for that, but if we need more and that's the direction, I'm sure that's something we'll be talking around the council table if that's something staff wants to submit. But thank you very much for that input. Matthew, I didn't know if you had anything to follow up with that.
Yeah, through you, Chair, just very quickly, I think I might add that phase 1 and these requirements are, a lot of them, like I said, are things we're already asking for, just with a bit more structure and standardization. So the costs shouldn't be too high in terms of additional construction materials. I think even in terms of some of the EV and solar readiness, we're not asking in any case for developers to install full solar roofing. We're asking for the hookups and the wiring there. So if someone does have an electric vehicle, they don't have to dig up their basement or their driveway and rewire their box in order to have that capability. We're asking them to set it up so that people have that choice. Because the reality is, in a subdivision of 200 homes, you might only have 20 electric vehicles. But the idea that in 10 years or 20 years, I heard something the other day that said like Ford is not going to be making gas vehicles after 2030, which I hope is the case. But it's hard to see in picture. But if we're building a subdivision that's not going to be constructed for another 5 years now, then 5 years out from the completion of that build, there won't be production of gas vehicles anymore. So these things are kind of meant to not just be current, but even looking a little further ahead too. So yeah, I just wanted to add that.
Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you.
Barry.
Yeah. Okay, mic's on. I just have a thought regards one item I've seen on the scroll by on this form, permeable surfaces. These surfaces over time lose their permeability, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So maintenance requirements or these permeable surfaces, they're not like a trade-off for conventional storm sewer capacities, I hope. I mean, with climate change and increased storm events, we're going to need more storm sewer capacities than before. And the use of permeable surfaces is great, but after 10 or 20 years, the permeability is compromised through getting clogged up. Is that correct?
Matthew.
Through you, Chair. Yeah, yes, Barry, you're exactly right. And permeability is kind of one thing here. I don't know the number you're specifically referring to, but it is here, I know. In terms of some of the water, so right now EC is the ecology question, but in terms of water, we do have other things like low impact drainage and bioswales where we're trying to incorporate some of that as well. There are other kind of water moving pieces to the GDS, but you're exactly right. And I think that's something as part of phase 2 we would need, like some kind of maintenance plan, and that the same goes for landscaping and trees and plantings, because what's the use of asking for 50% coverage if everything's going to be dead in a year? It defeats the entire purpose. So you're right, maintenance is a good point, and that's something we'll have to look at closely. And it's not just plantings, it's permeable surfaces. I think there are other areas too where we'll need to look at maintenance. So that's a good point. And maybe that's part of the holdback. Maybe a portion of the holdback goes back, 50%, and then another 50% in 5 years' time or something like that. But I'm hoping we can figure that out. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Barry.
Thank you.
Councillor Gartner.
Thank you. I'm going to comment on the trees. I've seen developers are always trying to save money. And there was, I guess they were called swamp cedars at one point. Barry, I'm not sure. Yeah, there is. So, you have developments where they put in these cheap trees and they haven't maintained them at all. And they're dying or they're dead. So to me, that's a huge one, is for any project, whatever is installed needs to be maintained. You said there's no point in putting in trees if they're going to be dead in 10 years or 15 years.
Matthew.
Yeah, through you, Chair. Definitely point heard. I think even in terms of regular landscaping requirements is something
Yes.
that municipalities can improve on in terms of the day-to-day planting. And I think we could work closely with Sarah's group and figure out a way, because there are inspections that happen usually a year out in terms of warranties, where the landscape architects, at least I know in Brampton when I was working there, they went out regularly and made sure that the tree plantings were in good health. But a year is often not enough time. Something might live for a year or 2 years and then go down. So I think there's ways where we can incorporate certain things that would work by way of securities for trees. And then even looking at the methods of planting and the type of trees we're asking for, I think we can potentially get more specific. The types of soils being used, the size of the hole, things like that, where again, it's going to take some resources, I think, to review, but maybe we can leverage that through holdbacks or something like that. But point taken.
Gary
Sorry.
Gredanis, I don't know if you know Gary Gredanis. He's all about trying to make sure that the right soil and the right depth. But
Yeah.
it can't be time limited.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you.
Any other questions, Councillor Gartner, or are you
I'm done. Thanks.
good? Okay. Barry, for a second time.
If I can just make a point regarding the issue of planting new trees. Conifers are notoriously bad in fall planting because the roots are not established, and yet they lose moisture right through the winter through their needles. So I think there should be a prohibition against conifer planting in the fall. They're only viable basically if they're planted in the spring and have a full season to establish roots. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry.
Thank you, Barry. Any other comments or questions or follow-up, or Sam?
Just a random question. For permeable pavement, would that be considered, like, would you consider cobblestone brick under that, since there's all of the cracks between it to allow for the inflow? Or are we just talking about the fancy, like, new technology that gets clogged?
Matthew?
Through you, Chair, there are inexpensive ways to do permeable pavement, and that's the one you'll see often in driveways, and those are the ones that clog up like even within a year. Some of our research has shown, and people, no, I shouldn't say people. We've had that discussion with some of our steering committee and some of our stakeholders too, and saying, we're going to spend this. It costs 3 times the amount of normal asphalt, and it needs to be ripped up and replaced every 3 or 5 years. But there are new systems that are a little bit more costly, that are kind of subterranean grids that are basically giant honeycombs that help filtrate, and you can put certain materials above them that are a little bit more durable in terms of longevity. But it's a fair point, and I think we have to maybe put something together, and this goes for the tree thing too, where we can have kind of like a design guidelines for some of these materials in terms of what we're asking for from developers. And the tree planting guidelines are a good example of what you would say, no planting conifers after July 1st or something like that. And you could do the same thing with building materials and waste materials. I think in our discussions with Build, they were putting together rather some of these resources in terms of sharing them with their own communities. And they did actually promise to share some stuff with us. So I think that's a great point. And I think we could work together to find out what is the most feasible in terms of maintenance. And even for, we're a great example as a municipality when we do our own projects, and we'll have to be, accountable to the GDS the same as any private developer. So looking at the materials that we're using for some of our projects and how we can best deal with waste and recycled masonry products and things like that. We actually had a great conversation with someone from, and I'm going to mess up the acronym, but it was like the Masonry Council of Canada or something like that. And they were telling us about the great, I think Natalie, you were part of that. You set that up actually. But they were talking about some great innovative solutions for recycling brick and mortar and new brick technologies that are costly now, but the same way that, things cycle down as they're more produced, they become a little bit more affordable and become more common practice. And we also hope that the building code moves forward the same way that we are to support these things. So I'm optimistic for sure that it can be achieved.
Thanks, Matthew. Natalie, I don't know if you wanted to, or Ms. Keely, you wanted to like chime in on that. I know that you were called out about some of that information.
No, I think Matthew covered it, and he makes a good point on the Ontario Building Code updates coming down the line. So we're all anxious to see what those changes will look like.
Great, thank you so much. Any other comments or questions at all? Ryan, go ahead.
I just had one. The questionnaire, is that for everyone that's building even one house, or is there a minimum number? Is it more for production builders building a certain number and higher?
Matthew?
Through you, Chair, no, it'll apply to everything. So if you have a site plan for something, I forget the rules, but usually when you extend your footprint by more than 50%, you're subject to the regular planning process, not just a building permit, but if you have a site plan or a draft plan approval, any kind of land use change, you'll be subject to the GDS. So basically everything, yeah.
Awesome. And are there any questions on there that are mandatory, or everything voluntary for implementation?
So, sorry, through you, Chair. The first, so again, this is kind of it's better to look at the handbook that I attached as an appendix. So it is following the agenda. But essentially where you'll see on the form that's no longer on the screen, I just realized, there are 2 tiers. Tier 1 is mandatory, that we're asking them to fulfill each of those criteria. And in the instance where a developer says it's not feasible or possible, we'll work with them, but we'll need evidence as to why it can't be attained, and in a reasonable way, we'll ask them to kind of up another criteria. And we're hoping, again, because there's no hard bylaw attached to phase one, that they'll be very, willing to work with us in certain areas, because it'll just hold up their project if they don't. But we do have some backing in the bylaw now. And like I said, we're going to hopefully add the pre-consultation bylaw piece that says they need to submit this. And again, we're really hoping that phase one is going to be buying in, doing all of the submission requirements, getting used to submitting these extra pieces of material where they are. There aren't too many things that are already being submitted. So it should be a successful phase one, but we're going to watch closely and report back within a year and adapt to where we need to.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? No? Okay, I had my own. Ryan, you beat me to it there. I had the exact same questions about the mandatory, because I did notice some of the buckets were mandatory. This is required mandatory total points, say 6. And so I guess my question was, and I think you kind of answered it, but I'm going to be a little more direct, I guess. If, say, I could be a star person and get 12 points in one bucket and go above and beyond, but I can't meet anything that's in the water section for whatever reason, how is that going to be able to be communicated through this form?
Yeah, through yourself. I think we're going to make sure, so the criteria that are mandatory, in all honesty, are not too far above and beyond what's already being submitted. But if for example, that situation happens where we have someone that says, this isn't doable, I can't achieve any of these, I think we would work together with the engineering team, say if it's water, and say, okay, what can we ask? And we want it to be flexible and fluid in phase one, but what can we ask for that ups that requirement? In terms of the actual form functioning, I don't think they can even get to the next page without saying yes. And that might be something we need to look back on, because if they just say yes for the sake of it, it wouldn't be flagged to us in any way, and we wouldn't know until we reviewed that specific requirement. It's a good point. There are even things that pop up on the page once you hit a certain requirement. So if you say yes, you have incorporated EV, for example, a pop-up will say how many spaces. And so they're required to say yes to the EV, but then the number of spaces they provide might be inadequate as per the handbook. And that's where we would go back and probably say, well, how come you weren't fulfilling this requirement? And they'll say, okay, well, we don't have enough grid support, or the servicing capacity isn't available here to do this. And I think it sounds like we're not prepared, but I think we're going to really need to see how the first few months go, because some of these haven't been done before. We've taken a lot of stuff from the city of Toronto. We've looked at a lot of municipalities throughout Canada, and we're just really trying to kind of push the bar in some areas, but at the same time not be too onerous. I think if we added like a no category, or if they said no, maybe we can have a subject bar that says, please provide an explanation why you answered no here. And that way, right away, we understand. I'm just thinking kind of on the go here. But then we would understand really quickly when the form is submitted that they've said no to this area and this is the reason why. And then we can follow up as we would any other kind of incomplete package.
Thank you. I think that makes sense with the having that little space to provide a comment. And I think it helps planning understand some of the reasonings why it may or may not be working. And if you find there's a trend where, 80% of the people can't do it for this reason, maybe we need to change what we're asking. So I think it's like you said, it's data-based. And, once you roll it out, you'll kind of get a bit of groove and tweak as you go. And I'm glad you are taking after those municipalities with Toronto. I'm currently doing a workshop through FCM on implementation of green infrastructure, and we're just started it. So we're sharing some information. So if anything comes across my desk with the links to other provinces, I'll send them your way, because we're from all across Canada, which is great. And we're already talking and sharing and kind of collaborating to try and get this up and running, because the implementation part is the toughest part, I think. So
yeah.
Final question, and we'll move on. You had a part there about the EV station, and the reason why I want to bring this up real quick is because if you were just to say, I'm going to put an EV station in and it's the level, I don't know if level one's like the low or the high, I don't know. It almost seems redundant to do because pretty much becomes like an obsolete EV charger. Like, do we have some sort of like minimum standard, or can we put a minimum standard as a mandatory, or is the mandatory only something that we can do at level one? Can we increase that?
Yeah, that's a good question. Natalie, do we have, or is there recently been an EV charging station standard that I feel like I've seen?
Through you, Madam Chair, I think I think we're talking two things. One, we had a policy for town-owned properties for EV stations with a minimum of level 2.
Yeah.
So I think that's what you're referring to, Matthew. And what we're talking about for the GDS, so far at the requirement level, we're not asking developers to install the actual units. It's to make the
Infrastructure.
facilities, yes,
Okay.
like EV ready. So,
Gotcha.
you know, the conduit and the electrical capacity for those facilities. So it's up to the whoever ends up living or working or buying these properties to go to the next phase. And then I believe in higher tiers of the GDS is where there's more and more requirements as you're describing.
Okay,
But
perfect.
but at the base requirement, we're looking at making facilities EV ready and not actually requiring the equipment installed.
Thank you. And one final question without having had the chance to kind of click through everything and kind of see. And I think somebody else had touched on it about the incentives moving beyond the mandatory level 1. Are there any specific prompts within the online portal that encourages people to move beyond the mandatory, to say, oh, there's this incentive. What can I do for level 2? What am I going to get for that? Let's move forward. And is that incentive there?
So currently in phase 1, there isn't anything like that. I think you bring up a good point. I think we talked about incorporating kind of like a level of achievements almost. So you would get, you know, like a bronze level if you hit a certain minimum, and then a silver, and then a gold. And I think that could go a long way in terms of communication. And we talked about potentially, you know, a developer that hits that certain level would get maybe a call out on our webpage saying this development achieved gold status of the GDS in Aurora or something like that. I think right now that we could probably incorporate that right away as part of phase 1. As part of phase 2 with the incentives, I definitely think that would be a part of it, and saying, you know, as you hit these optional, you get a better score, and that's you know, that leads you to this incentive or some kind of expedited approval or whatever it may be. But good points. I think even now at the phase 1 level, that might be something we want to do in terms of kind of like a broadcast, or even like a quarterly newsletter, a GDS newsletter that says these are the progress, and it makes the town look good as a whole as well, you know, sharing our stories. These are good news stories. And I think, yeah, good point.
Okay, no, I appreciate it. I think for the sake of time, we can move on to the next agenda item, but that would be something that I think that we should really pay attention to, is finding out what those incentives are and how we're going to entice people to want to get those incentives, whether it's a check, a seal, an award, whatever it is, good green stewardship award, something that they can put on that would give them that incentive. I know that we talked about DC charges or something financial as well. So I just don't want to see that not fall by the wayside on this next stage, because I think that we want to encourage them right out of the gate. I'm just going to leave it at that, because I'm sure that'll be around the council table. But is there any other questions or comments before I call the vote? No, seeing none. All right, so if there's no further comments, I'll call the vote. All those in favor to receive? Oppose? That carries. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, so item 6.2, memorandum from Energy and Climate Change Analyst Ms. Keel, on the anti-idling policy update. And if I may have a mover and a second to put the seconder to put the item on the floor for discussion. Okay, so I have Ryan and then Colin. That's great. Ms. Keel, would you like to speak to this item, or Ms. Van Leeuwen, who would like to speak to this?
Yep. I lost everyone. Okay, so the report is an update on the anti-idling policy and its implementation up to date. The policy was approved by council in 2020 with the intent to reduce unnecessary idling in the town. The report outlines the key staff that were involved in this implementation, which is bylaw services, fleet services, and communications. The report also outlines all the activities that were executed during the initial education campaign, the ongoing challenges to enforcement, the changes to the town's bylaw and how it impacts the anti-idling policy, a proposal for our next steps in the education campaign, and a proposed changes to the policy itself to better align with our neighboring municipalities. And then finally, staff recommend from the report, staff recommend that the policy be revised to reduce idling times from 5 minutes to 2 minutes, that a continued focus on idling education continues, and that staff review the policy in 2 years. So I'm looking for any comments on the report or the revised policy. Any comments on the proposed changes and the staff recommendations, and any comments on the proposed seasonal targeted education program from the report.
Thanks, Ms. Keel. Any questions or comments on the policy change? Colin.
I would say it's a great policy change. I wish it was 1 minute, but 2 minutes is 250% better than 5 minutes. So, yeah, because I just find people idle thoughtlessly. It'd be nice to get rid of that.
Thanks, Colin. Anybody else? Councillor Gartner?
Thank you. So a long time ago, they tried to get an anti-idling bylaw in place. And it was, you know, Ms. Van Leeuwen explained to me how difficult that would be. So I think when Natalie came aboard, she suggested I think Ms. Van Leeuwen did too, the idea of a policy, and a policy that would start with education and hopefully end up in a bylaw. Natalie, I think I'm right on that. We were going to do a policy and education for a year and then come back to council with thoughts of a bylaw.
Ms. Keel?
Through you, Madam Chair. Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. So what I'm guessing from reading this is that that's just not viable at this. Well, A, it's not viable. And B, you found that the education component is what seems to really convince people to not idle. So the bylaws, I don't think the bylaws, I don't see anywhere that says the bylaw is going to be coming into the future. So the intent right now is to just keep on with the education and do as much as we can with that. So that's, I'm getting that gist, right?
Ms. Keel?
Through you, Madam Chair, that's correct. Moving to a bylaw, it does provide an enforcement mechanism, but from experiences from other municipalities, it seems like the enforcement is very challenging to implement, regardless if it's, a policy or a bylaw. Changes, so the original policy that we had developed based on 5 minutes was based on the noise bylaw because there was some idling restrictions. And so we aligned that original policy to align with that noise bylaw. Recent changes in the noise bylaw have eliminated idling specifically. It's just, from that bylaw, but it's really specific to noise. So even if a car's idling, if it's not making any noise, it's not going against any of the noise bylaw. So we've kind of lost any kind of enforcement mechanism within our policy based on that recent change. So, there really is no enforcement now in our policy. But as we discussed in the report, even if there was a specific bylaw, we'd still have similar enforcement challenges that other municipalities face, like lack of staff or resources and time for staff to actually receive a complaint and witnessing the idling. So there are still, if it will still be a very difficult enforcement if it were a bylaw. So what other municipalities have done have really focused on the education side and less on the enforcement side. So that's what staff is proposing, is that we continue on this path of education. We can reduce it to 2 minutes to align with other municipalities, and go from there. So that's the feedback from our staff, is to continue with the education program for another 2 years.
Counselor?
Yeah, I'm disappointed, but that makes sense. So I agree with your report. And, I've been known to go up to a car and ask them to turn off their engine. I don't do it too often, but people have been okay with it. But, people don't really know the difference between a policy and a bylaw. So now I can go up to them and say, well, we have an anti-idling policy in Aurora. I don't think they'll know the difference. But it's really important. And I think the signage with the education around school zones, and also the signage around school zones and in front of public buildings like the town hall, and just to get that awareness there. And it looks like a no parking. I mean, it can look like a no parking sign, but it just says no idling zone. Natalie, I think we have some signs like that, but I would like to see more signs like that in public places, especially, when people are waiting for the kids to come out of rec centers, etc. And I know sometimes it's cold and just have to leave the car on, but it's an awareness issue. So with the signage, is there an intention to do, I know there's signage now, but is there an intention to do a lot more signage? And then last question is, I really like what you put together for the social media campaign. I just wanted your thought on, so you took off Twitter. Was it Twitter or Instagram you took off? I think it was Twitter you took off. So I guess Facebook and Instagram are better vehicles. Just a quick comment, if you wouldn't mind.
Ms. Keel?
Through you, Madam Chair, for the first point regarding the signage. So yes, some years ago, the town also did some campaigning, anti-idling campaigning, I believe with some schools, and they also had some signage within the town-owned parking facilities, which I believe they were the idle-free zone that you were mentioning, Councillor Gardner. Those are currently still there, but part of this campaign, we ordered new ones that match our campaigning message, which is every second counts. and we have them different colors, and I believe they're bigger, and they're going to be put in more prominent locations, which I think was an issue with the older ones. So that's going to change, and those will be installed sometime this spring. We're figuring out the locations. And there are specific signage that was ordered as well for our fleet, our operations
Right.
center in where the fleet vehicles are, as part of a support for the education for fleet staff. So the signage will be coming in the next months or so. I think maybe we're still figuring out the locations. And then for the social media, yeah, I believe Twitter and Facebook were the two locations that were focused on for the social media campaign. And there was within the report, there was a kind of breakdown of what was the messaging used in that, and how many. So, it was Twitter, Instagram, Facebook were the three areas that the messaging was kind of shared, and how many people were engaged. I'm not like this communications person, but there's like ways to gauge like the interaction of the public with your messaging. So that was all recorded, and it seemed pretty successful in terms of getting those likes and views.
No. Oh, I see. You're not much better than me, Natalie. Sorry. And with respect to the signs, I think we had a conversation at some point in the past. You need to judge the height level very carefully, because if the signs are bigger and brighter colors, then they'll be better to be seen. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Councillor. Colin, you had something you wanted to follow up on?
Yeah, I just wonder if the town can ever take on institutionalized idling. And I'm thinking of all the drive-throughs and drive-through banks, drive-through to pick up your coffee. I can understand if somebody's got a physical disability needing to drive through to do that. I don't understand it any other time. And you'll see cars lined up, like 15, 20 cars while people are sitting in their cars. And it's institutionalized pollution, really.
I don't know if you want to answer that. I mean, I feel what you're saying. I feel like it's something that it would be tough for bylaw to, I guess, enforce when someone's at a private business while they're picking up a drive-through. I mean, I don't know how you would enforce that. But I can say, I think most vehicles that are on the market today have that auto idle that turns your car off when your foot's on the brake. It's becoming more and more predominant with a lot of the new models that are out there. But I don't know if Ms. Keel, if you wanted to quickly just chime in on the institutionalized area of that.
For you, Madam Chair. Yes, that's a great point. Some municipalities are fighting that issue in that they're trying to reduce those types of idling. There is a challenge, like if you just think about, like if you're in a drive-through, you're actually driving every couple of minutes, right? Like you're not idling for 20 minutes, but you're like kind of slowly moving, stopping, slowly moving, right? So it would be hard, for bylaw to go in there and observe and like, and justify that kind of ticket. I know some municipalities are actually not allowing drive-throughs anymore. They're just restricting drive-throughs in general, but that's more on like the development side of things than kind of the bylaw side of it, or enforcing anti-idling like bylaw. So it is something that municipalities are looking at, and it is a challenge for sure. So yeah, I don't have an answer for you, but
No,
it is a concern and very hard to enforce again.
I think that's a great answer. That's probably the solution. It's not really you can't send some poor person around with a notebook to give people tickets and take their rage. It's a better idea for the town to take it on and just say, we're not allowing this anymore.
Exactly.
Thank you, Colin. And I guess the only comment I have is, like the education side of it, which I think is great. And maybe, with these decals that town staff will have, maybe these decals could be designed, in a very fun way with some of the media we have that could be available for the town to pick up if they wanted to put it on their own cars to kind of advertise themselves. Some people kind of like that stuff, or it could be something they put on the back of a laptop or a phone, just some kind of fun kind of promotion. And it could also be, something maybe store owners would want to put in their windows, idle free area. And as a reminder, to Colin's point, to kind of encourage people to, utilize, parking or utilize that, idle off option on cars that they have now, just to kind of build that awareness that, I think that companies promoting that idle free in their window shows that they're being environmentally conscious. I think that would be kind of like a neat way to kind of almost adding that verified check on their window saying they're environmentally conscious. And I think that they would like that. So anyway, that's just my 2 cents. Any other comments or questions on this? Nope. Oh, Ms. Keel?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, just to comment on that suggestion, I really like the decal idea. I'll see what we can do internally. We have, from the messaging and the signage that we've developed for both the permanent signage and some of our mobile signs that have been put up temporarily during our campaigning, which we'll be doing in the future again. We actually saved all those like high quality PDFs and have them for free as a resource on our website. For schools, businesses, they can download the PDF and then use it for their own printing needs. And if they want to make their own signs or, use the same kind of, even if it's a print on a paper, they can, poster board, they can do that. We're looking like in our future campaigning, doing more targeted messaging. So schools and school zones tend to be a hotspot. So we're likely going to be focusing a lot on the schools again, because our initial campaign was actually pretty focused in the school zones. But we'll be again doing something more targeted to the schools in the fall for sure when kids go back to school. And we're going to be looking at, promoting these materials that have been developed for schools and these signage options for schools to use as well. So we'll be, this past first, campaign was trying to hit all the whole public, so we were kind of spread everywhere. But we're looking in the fall season to be, a little more targeted to schools and reaching out to schools and sharing the materials that were developed for the town and sharing these free resources and toolkits that were developed for them. And then we can do, future campaigns that could be more specific to businesses as well and reach out and do something, with the businesses in the town as well. So I think that's a good idea that you mentioned.
Great, thanks. I look forward to that. And I'm glad it went from 5 to 2 because I know that I was pushing that at council last time. I didn't like the 5 minutes. So I'm glad to see it's come to fruition. If there's no other comments or questions, I'll call the vote, but I do need Sam and Ryan online in order to call the vote. We just got to wait for Sam. Got to have quorum here.
Oh, wow.
Sam, there she is. We need quorum to call the vote here. No further comments or questions, so I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor to receive and comments referred? Opposed? That carries. Thank you very much, Ms. Keel. We're going to go down to item number 7, informational items. This is Environmental Advisory Committee updated list. Not sure if I Ms. Clerk, is this just because of the new chair and vice chair appointment? Is that what this is? Ms. Bodis, I don't know if you're on mute, but I don't hear your response.
Oh, okay. I'll let
Or
our
Samantha,
deputy
I'm so
clerk Sam is
sorry.
here.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Through you, Madam Chair. Hi, everybody. My name is Samantha.
Hi.
I'm the deputy clerk. Hi. So this is a new item we actually have. So the advisory committee update list is an item that we're piloting with a few of our committees this term with the intent to introduce it to all of our committees next term. The purpose of the list is just to show where the committee comments go after the meeting and how they're used to inform council decisions. Some of the feedback we've received from our committees and what we've heard is that they often don't see what happens to their comments. So the intent of this list is to bridge that information gap. So going forward for the remainder of this term, this will be a standing information item that will be updated for every meeting.
Perfect. Okay, and with that, I guess I should have a mover and a seconder to put the item on the floor for discussion. So anybody? Moving it? Barry, second by Ryan. Great. Sam, you did speak to it a bit. Is there anything else that you would like to add to that? I think I did see some updates there, but did you want to add to that a little further? Sam?
And she's gone.
Okay, maybe she can't hear me. Does anybody have any questions or comments about the new updated information that was provided? I thought it was quite thorough and it kind of gave a little bit of a history of what was going on and what the progress was. Any questions or comments about this new format that we've been given?
I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, me too. Okay, no other questions or comments. I will call the vote, but I do need Wendy and Colin
sorry.
on board.
Coming back. Okay, thanks.
Colin, maybe he went to duty called.
Yeah, it's strange just having quorum. Gives you no leeway, right?
No leeway, I know.
No. Yeah,
So,
'cause I was-
if I may, within the report and the update, can you hear me? Okay. I noticed that there was some clickable links, which I did not go clicking on in the links, but does it kind of click to the minutes of the link? Is that what it does?
Through you, Madam Chair. Yes. So the link goes exactly to where it says it goes. So the minutes go to the meeting minutes from the advisory committee meeting. And if you see a report that is, a link that is blue for staff report, that'll go to the staff report for that particular item.
Perfect. Love it. Absolutely love it. Colin, welcome back. We were just going to call the vote.
Oh,
but we
I'm
need a
sorry.
quorum.
It's just my luck. I thought we're
Right?
starting a new topic.
But since you're here, did you have any comments or questions on the item, which is about the updated list?
No, I was fine with it. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. All right. So without further ado, all those in favor? Opposed? That carries. All right. Thank you so much, Ms. Yu. Appreciate that. Okay, so now we are 7.2 Town of Aurora report. This was something that was requested by Barry, the economic value of nature capital assets associated with the ecosystem protection. Dated June 2013. It's an add-on item. May I have a mover and a seconder to put the item on the floor for discussion? Barry and Wendy. And just to clarify that the Town of Aurora report, the economic value of natural capital assets associated with the ecosystem protection dated 2013 of June be received for information. I'm not so sure if staff would like to speak to the item at all, or at all before Barry has a go at this, or so that's kind of what I have here. No? Okay. Barry, did you want to take the floor? This is something that you felt that you wanted to put on the agenda tonight and have a discussion. So the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. I'm just going to read basically from my email that I sent with my request. I was asking that we get an update of any progress on certain items in this report as to their present status. Referring to the report, there's three pages, 7, 9, and 10. And in those pages, there's reference to certain items, certain properties in the town that are identified as having specific environmental value to the town. On page 7, they're talking about the Urban Wildlife Park and the associated holdings to that. On page 9, this is where I have specific interest, Case Woodlot, the Shepherd's Bush Conservation Area, the Vandorf Woodlot, Mackenzie Marsh, and the Ann Bartley Smith property, which is in the southwest corner of the town. And then on page 10, the Stronach Eco Park. I'm going to just refer to some notations I have to myself. The Case Woodlot and the Vandorf Woodlot are the subject of a 2009 10-year management plan. And I would inquire, basically, is there a plan completion review or a new 10-year plan for those two properties? And next is the Shepherd's Bush Conservation Area. It's managed by the town and the Conservation Authority, and it's actually owned by the Ontario Heritage Trust. And I'm wondering, is there a pending management plan review? I recall there was such a review a number of years ago. My memory fails me as to the exact year, but it strikes me we may be due for another one. Mackenzie Marsh is identified as a significant habitat improvements are planned for the area adjacent to the trails. From personal knowledge, I know that there have been water retention ponds, some plantings in the northwest corner of the property, immediately north of the boardwalk, which is now undergoing some replacement or renewal. But I'm wondering if there's a management plan specifically for the town's involvement in that property. And next to last is the Ann Bartley Smith property. As I indicated, it's in the southwest corner of the town, and it's 38 hectares. It's owned by the Ontario Heritage Foundation. And the town, according to this report that we have, the town is working with the Ontario Heritage Foundation on a management plan for these lands. As of 2013 press release, that matter was unresolved. And the OHF has issued a baseline report in 2014. And also in 2014, the Fleming College prepared a map and video for the Ontario Heritage Trust. Those are accessible through a Google search online. And as late as this year, there's a mountain bike complex described online on a Trail Forks website. So in other words, that group, that organization, if you would, Trail Forks, is considering it a viable mountain bike site, which is referred to in the video presented by the Fleming College students for the Ontario Heritage Trust. So there's a lot of local use, kind of like casual or unofficial, non-official. But again, I think the town is way past needing a management plan for that land. And lastly, the Stronach Eco Park is mentioned in this report before us. The components for this park, it says, are still under review. And I ask, is there a management plan being developed for that property? And what is the status and viability of that Stronach Eco Park? So these are the kind of questions myself I'm pending regards this report. And I'd like the members here to comment on that and hopefully request those questions be answered by staff. That's my hope. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Barry. Did staff wanted to chime in with any feedback at all on that? I know that we haven't asked you to report back with any reports, but just maybe to provide any comments.
Through you, Madam Chair. Yeah, we wouldn't be able to provide a specific update to each of these properties. That would be something that would need to go to staff, specific staff involved in those projects. It is an older project or document, so you know, it will take some time to find the right staff involved for those projects. Just a comment, a general comment on this document, which is it's a very important document in the sense that it's the first time that the town was able to put dollar figures with these types of assets. And it was less about what those projects are, but putting value to those projects. And also providing recommendations to town and town staff to enhance and promote these types of development in the town, or resources in the town. So, you know, some of the recommendations were actually to develop a green development standard, which is interesting because that's what we're working on right now. Another one is, you know, landowner education was another recommendation through the LEAF program, and other promoting other programs to landowners that would again enhance these types of lands, like ecological gift program and tax benefit programs, you know, when landowners enhance their properties in that way and protect these types of assets. So again, I can't speak to those specific projects, but I just wanted to give a little bit of context of what this document entails. And yeah, that's it.
Thanks, Natalie. I appreciate it. I know there's a lot of work involved on some sort of update on what Barry is requesting as far as the information. I know Councillor Gardner has a question, but before I go to her, if I may just ask a question to Barry, you kind of had like a very vast kind of list, and I'm really just trying to understand, because if the committee is looking to get a report back on some of the questions you've asked, I'm just kind of trying to figure out specifically what that request and a motion would be, because I think how it was communicated and last with you was that, you know, generally, you know, council could put a motion in to ask the committee for an update on what you're specifically asking, but it's such a grand thing. I'm just trying to understand what you're trying to achieve in a short, sweet sentence to help us understand the kind of information you're trying to pull from that, because it is a very, it does cover so much stuff. So if maybe you could just, before I go to Councillor Gardner, if you could just kind of explain that a little bit and help me understand what is it we're asking staff, or the kind of information that you're seeking, and we can go from there.
Well, if I may, status update. It's basically approaching 10 years since that report. Yeah, there was 2013 and we're now into 22. There are the identified properties, specific properties, basically the ones of my concern, like I say, are on pages 9 and 10. So a status update and regards to properties, what's being done in those intervening 10 years by the town. Also regards their legal status. In other words, in a couple of them, it's the Ontario Heritage Foundation involved, and the nuts and bolts about an agreement haven't been, to my knowledge, worked out or finalized, and also the issue of management plans. So it's physical changes, improvements, physical improvements, if you would, over those 10 years. Status improvements or status development, and then management plans for the future. Once these official intent and hope and plan for these various properties by the town, those which the town has direct involvement in their operation. So it's kind of a three-pronged request. Physical status update over those 10 years, legal status regards the heritage properties and the Stronach property, and then a management plan, whether we have them, whether they need updating, if they are being updated, and I don't know, put that in one sentence.
No, it's okay. It was just because you had so many specific properties, but you know, from what it sounds, an overarching, you know, review of everything is, and this in particular, obviously you're making some comments to that. I know there has been some changes, and I'm sure Councillor Gardner, you can speak to that about the Ann Hartley property. And I know that there was, I also put a motion in to review private open space and designation on properties for natural key heritage and stuff that is part of the OPR review as well. But Councillor Gardner, you had something you wanted to add, so I'm going to turn it to you before I keep talking here.
Well, I would like to say that this report was put together by Jim Kyle, who was a special project manager in the CAO's office. And there was a lot of, excitement about it. It's a very important report. And I would like to ask, I know it's 50 pages or so, but I would like to ask the committee to have a read, because it's very relevant for today. And it's important, especially for people on this committee. With respect to what Barry's asking, I think when Jim Kyle left, I think nothing happened with this Barry. I think it just got buried. I pulled it out during the summer to have another read of it, and was trying to figure out if I could bring forward a motion on it. So, hey, you just did it. But the thing is, I think maybe the place to start, Natalie, would be with Gary Gradanis. I'm not ever sure if I say his name right, but you know who I'm talking about. With Gary in particular, and possibly with Sarah, and just kind of get their take on how we could do what Barry is asking. I think the update would be pretty much nothing's been done, but I certainly don't think there are management plans that have been done. Rachel, I don't, I've been on council now for 3 years. I don't think you've heard of any management plans for any of these, and I certainly haven't. So, Barry, thanks, because this report should not go to waste. We should be trying to act on it, and we should at least know, Natalie, what's what, and if the truth is that nothing's happened, then we have to try and figure out how to go forward with it. And it wouldn't, we're not going to be doing it tomorrow, but at least if we can get a council motion that says that, we have to, respect is a difficult word, but really respect the work that was done and the importance of it, and just figure out how to activate it. I think that's all I have to say, Councillor.
Thanks, Councillor Gardner. I appreciate it. I know some of these management plans kind of get buried a bit, and we pick and choose maybe a couple components to focus on, like the Green Development Standard was something that was pulled from one of these plans, but it took quite a few years to implement, and I'm grateful that Barry brought this forward.
Thank you. If I could just add, the Green Development Standard is one thing with respect to planning, but
Yeah.
the economic value of green infrastructure, well, that is money to us. Green infrastructure provides provides services that we don't have to do. A lot of it is stormwater management and, Councillor Gillan, carbon sequestration and that kind of a thing. But if you think about it, 10, and probably Mr. Call started work on this before it was published. So, maybe we're talking 12 years ago or 13 years ago. This was quite a revolutionary idea, certainly in Aurora, but I think in Canada, not so much in the States. And it's a great read. You'd be surprised how much all of this green is worth.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And I'm sure it's probably worth a lot more now.
Yes, but we've also lost a lot of it. That would be
100%. I'm just saying the market value of 2013 and now could be different.
Yeah, we've a lot of that green infrastructure has gone through development.
Colin?
Well, that's exactly what I wanted to say as well, that I think I saw numbers there, and I think they're probably vastly understated if anyone was to look at it now. They're learning more and more how valuable it is and irreplaceable. A lot of these things are, like wetlands and this sort of thing. So I'm not quite sure how the dollar value was considered or how it is applied, but certainly it should be updated, because the numbers were just even with a cursory look, vastly understated. I mean, I think I remember seeing something with 7.5 million for the whole of Aurora's natural environment. No, far too low. So I think that should be reviewed and updated as well. And I agree, it was a very interesting approach. So having that updated and then actually, because I suppose you start off with a vision. This is our vision. And then you can start saying, okay, and here's the things we're going to start doing to implement our vision. And then we're going to reflect on it and check back and see if our vision is being implemented. And so these kind of vision documents are important. And it is a good idea for Aurora to have a vision. So I think it was good Barry brought it forward.
Thanks, Colin. Sam?
Yeah. Okay. This is my jam. I love ecosystem services. Wrote a whole undergrad thesis on them. So if you ever want to talk about them, I'm so happy to talk about them all day. But in regards to this plan, I had a couple issues with it because it's great. It's so important. I agree. So happy it got brought forward, but reading it, it's so dated, like not just in terms of numbers, but in terms of there's very little about the actual ecosystem services being provided. It was very numbers heavy, but very information lacking, I found, because I felt the information was very based on, well, I'm not gonna say what was available at the time in terms of that, I don't know. Very buzzword heavy in terms of carbon sequestration. Oh, it mitigates pollution. I would love to see like actual details because they do so much more than that. And my second point, I guess, reading through it is that I can't articulate enough how much I hate the fact that agriculture and like golf courses, I know they weren't considered under the broader umbrella in the second half of the report numbers. But the fact that they're being presented as contributing to ecosystem services is just like off the charts crazy to me, because yes, agriculture does have some carbon, but it's not talking about the broader impacts of, it mentions golf courses, but that they have negative impacts. But oftentimes the benefits are outweighed by the pollution, fertilizer. And that's something I would like to see if this paper was updated, is looking at the broader lens, because we get trapped a lot in the world of thinking that the natural area preserves itself in its own area and that it's immune to the development around it. And that's like crazy untrue. If you develop around a wetland, the wetland decreases exponentially in terms of its ecosystem services. So it's just more, it's such a good base. I love that we're talking about it. But there are a couple key details in it that are huge red flags for me.
Thanks, Sam. Appreciate that feedback. Love it. Ryan?
I just had a quick question. So this is from 2013. I noticed the Stronach Eco Park was listed in there, which was great to see. Actually, I had no idea. Is that land protected still? Because I know there's some plans for it to have like walkthrough trails and a bunch of other stuff. But from what I recall, it's just kind of dead land right now. So just curious as to whatever happened to that space there.
Ms. Keel, would you happen to know, or I guess is Matthew still online, or?
Yeah, I think that would be someone in our planning team would probably be able to answer that. But again, that would be part of this update that's being requested. Yeah.
Can we follow up, Ryan?
No, it's okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Barry? You're on mute, Barry. You're still on mute, Barry.
Clicked it, didn't work. Yeah, I've tried to condense the wording. I've come up with the term stewardship update, field projects, and management plans for these specified properties. So basically, I would hope that we can request staff to provide a stewardship update involving field projects and management plans that have been finalized or performed over the past decade since this report. Thank you.
Thanks, Barry. Appreciate your feedback. I believe Councillor Gardner, you went off camera, but you did have your hand up. Are you wanting to add some additional comments?
Well, I just was going to say with the the Stronach Eco Park, that was part of, or it was trying to be part of an agreement with the town about playing fields. It was actually very complicated, and not sure that it really was an eco park in the best sense of the word. But as far as I know, it's just kind of fallen off the table. I haven't heard it mentioned I don't think, Rachel, you've heard it mentioned. I haven't heard it mentioned for a long time. I mean, it was when also Mr. Stronach was, in Canada full time, and this was, his property is there and his daughter's property is there, so they were more involved. But although he has a pretty interesting store and restaurant going on in the Walmart Plaza, but yeah, it's just the idea didn't work and it just fell apart.
Thanks, Councillor Gardner. Any other comments or questions about the report? Ms. Keel?
Through you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of comments as the comments were coming in. I made some notes here. Again, this document isn't a plan. It was an assessment to create a baseline, an economic baseline, right, for that point in time. And it was more a bit about the methodology and putting a value and kind of having a starting point going forward. And it was less about what those individual projects were. And then in the end, the recommendations weren't based on what those projects were, but in general, in a general sense, what the town can do to further protect, further enhance. So I just wanted to be clear that whatever request goes through, if you want an update of that document, it would be more likely an update of what those recommendations were and what the status of that is, rather than the status of those mentioned properties. So I think whatever gets written down has to be kind of clear that the properties that were mentioned weren't part of a plan. This was part of an assessment. So if there's another document from the town, like a natural heritage plan with those projects listed as these are projects or properties that the town would like to develop or enhance or whatever, that would be more appropriate than kind of going into this document that was what seemed to be more like GIS based. If you look at some of the methodology, it was more like defining the acreage of wetlands and the acreage of grassland and things like that. So I think if we're looking for like a physical status update, similar to what was done in this assessment, it would require like a full assessment update, meaning, getting the GIS team involved and getting new economic figures and things like that, which I don't think is the intent of what Barry is trying to do. But I just wanted to make it clear that this wasn't a plan, like a project plan that the town was implementing. It was an assessment. So we'll have to make sure that's like clearly written and understood that we can't just make a new plan like this. And we also, what was written in terms of those properties wasn't an official town plan. And it was an assessment of those lands at that time.
Thank you, Ms. Keel. And if I could just get a motion to extend, because it's 9 o'clock. So I'm thinking probably 15 minutes will probably be good and we can wrap it up. Can I get a mover? Ryan, seconder Sam, great. Perfect. So we'll continue on. Ms. Keel, were you finished? Do you have anything to follow up with that, or yeah, you're good? Okay, perfect. Barry?
Yeah, if I may. Yeah, the fact that I asked that this particular plan from 2013 be presented for information I did not mean that I was asking that this plan be updated. I was indicating that it was, to me, a source of information, specifically those pages I quoted. And as such, it was like an inventory of these properties. And it's the status of those specific properties I'm asking for a stewardship update, not an update for the report, which just happened incidentally to bring these to my attention when I read the report. So the report itself and its intent is not my concern. My concern is the specific identified properties and their status and their stewardship. So I just want to make that very clear that that's my concern. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. And I think originally, I think that's what I was trying to get at earlier, because I was a little confused with the whole assessment and then the plan, and I wasn't really sure where it was going from. So it is a reference point, to be clear. And you're asking on specific properties are the ones you've listed that you just want to have an update on what's the intention of the protection of these properties that we have in the town of Aurora, and what are we doing about it in order to ensure we have those protections. So I think that's where we're at. Is that correct? Okay, just wanted to be clear on that. Okay, so Sam, I think you had your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, totally agree with Barry. I'm a totally different page, not a separate page, just a different mind train for this question. I'm interested in this report. Is there any, I guess, Natalie, you would maybe know this, is there any baseline information for these ecosystems' health that this report was based off of that would be compared? I'm gonna assume no, because I haven't seen it in my existence in Aurora. Anyway, I was just wondering if someday this report got to be redone with current values, if there was a baseline to follow in terms of where we were at, where we are now. Like, because I think that might be helpful in also swaying. I think ecosystem services are a really powerful tool when you attach money to otherwise not intangible things, but less appreciated moments. But I wonder if it would be worthwhile to get a baseline of the town of Aurora's natural capital assets as they stand.
Ms. Keel, did you want to add to that at all about the health of the wetlands or natural key heritage areas?
Through you, Madam Chair. Well, how I understood this project, again, I was not part of this development. And I know Corey, I saw his name in there, so he's still at the town. So we can refer back to some of those staff that were involved. But when I read it and understood the methodology, I mean, the purpose of the document was to create that health baseline and put an economic number. And how they did that was not through physical inspection of those sites, but through GIS, like satellite imagery type thing, where they were defining the different land types and then using the economic data that they had for those types. Any future update, if that were to ever occur, would probably have to follow similar methodology, maybe more refined, depending on, what's the latest and the greatest in terms of satellite imagery and things like that. But having a physical inspection of that, part of that project, that could be part of the scope. But from my understanding, this first baseline assessment was more on like general land types and not the health of each individual type. So I don't know if I answered your question. Sorry.
No, that's great. So yeah, it's basically the same point, like physical inspection, whatever. If you have LiDAR, if you have satellite, whatever, I think maybe just getting a current version of what we have would be beneficial, especially if there's already a methodology set up and the town routinely gets whatever satellite imagery they prefer.
Right, and I think it was pointed out that the economic value for these services probably have changed as well over time. So it would be like, you know, kind of two-pronged to get the latest, you know, hectares, areas of these locations, and potentially get some of that health quantification as well. And then also getting the, you know, the new updated economic value.
Yeah, because I just think it could be a good benefit to Barry's point too, of knowing what we have to then further preserve what's left. So anyway, I think it's super interesting, great report on all aspects that have been brought to table.
Thanks, Sam. I appreciate it. And I think we're talking about two different reports, but I think they're equally as important. And that's why we're having this great conversation today. I really appreciate it. I just have one question, and I guess it's to Councillor Gardner, because you are on the Lake Simcoe Conservation Authority board. Do they provide information to municipalities based on some of the sensitivities of the current wetlands and stuff that we already have here? Is that a tool or a resource that municipalities can point to?
That's an interesting question. I have a meeting on Friday. I think they're, you know, I don't know. I think they're more about commenting on development with respect to wetlands, etc. And our floodplain map hasn't been updated. You know, I don't think that would be a priority or one of their, certainly not one of their core services. It might be a service that we could pay for, but
maybe you could find out on Friday if it's something that, if it was available for us to see and have that comparator as we move, I guess, through this information process we're trying to seek. I don't know, maybe.
Yeah, their services are in flux at the moment. They'll be coming to council. I mean, that may have to be a question that waits till they come to council with how they're updating their services and what we're going to have to pay extra for. But thank you. It's a question. It's a good question.
Thank you. Okay, as to not kind of sway off topic here, I know that because we're kind of talking about two different things, the asset report, but Barry's specifically on the, I guess, stewardship on the specific sites that he was mentioning. And just to kind of get a sense of, you know, the people who are here tonight, is that something you feel like if, you know, Councillor Gardner and I were to, you know, put a motion in, is that something that you all feel is something would be important to get an update on the specific sites that Barry had mentioned in his presentation tonight and the email that was sent? I'm just curious if anybody has anything to add to that question or as the committee. Colin, do you just want to get some feedback from you guys if you guys think?
I would support what Barry's asking for. I think it's a good idea to get that information. If we want updated values, I think there are probably the Lake Simcoe.
Sorry, I don't think it's value. I think it's
no. I know. I've gone on to a second topic. no. I understand there's two topics there, and I agree with what Barry's saying. So I would support Barry. If we don't feel a need to go into the economics of it, that's fine. I don't. If there is a value to that, then we could. The staff are there to do it. You know, and I think there's other like the Lake Simcoe Conservation Authority they would have ecologists and people who could give us those numbers as well, I would assume. I would think so. But
Thank you, Colin. Thank you, appreciate it. Sam?
Yeah, I think I support it because with the Case Woodlot scare of being sold off to developers that I was seeing around my Aurora pages, I would really like to get the status of what's left of our natural areas. Otherwise, I am worried that they'll just sneakily drop off slowly. And I think that I feel, at least amongst like the people I interact with in town, that is a concern. We want to maintain our green spaces. We don't want them. Development's great, but not in our forests. So I think that this would be really helpful in assuring that we can continue to have forests.
Thanks, Sam, appreciate it. Ryan?
I was just thinking about what Natalie said. It's an assessment. It's not a planning document. I'm indifferent. I'm not sure. Maybe I'm misunderstanding. I'm not sure if it's, if it's updated or whatever, what the cost would be, those kind of things. And I'm indifferent. I could go either way.
Thanks so much, Ryan. Appreciate it. All right, we have 1 more minute left. Councillor Gardner, do you have any final thoughts before we vote tonight?
No, I do like the comments of the committee, and I think, no, I'm good.
Great, perfect.
Can I
Listen,
just?
yeah, go ahead. Skill?
Through you, Madam Chair. Do you have the draft, like, how does it work? Do you have a draft motion?
Well,
Like,
okay, so correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Hugh, but I feel like, the comments will be received by the committee tonight. And I think from there, Councillor Gardner and I would formulate our own formal motion to put through to council, but that would be something that we would choose to do offline, but it wouldn't be a direction through the committee. Ms. Hugh, would that be correct?
To you, Madam Chair, it's Linda. Sam has left the meeting, but that is correct, what you've just said.
Okay, perfect.
okay. So just to clarify, because I feel like, again, there are like 2 things being said. Barry's not asking to update the assessment, like have a 2022. He's looking for a status update on those properties that were mentioned in that document.
Correct.
Okay. Just want to make sure that everyone is on the same page.
Yeah, that's what we're speaking to. I know it was a little confusion with the actual title of the document and what it was representing. I appreciate
okay,
that.
perfect.
Okay, so without further ado, if there's no further comments, I'll call the vote to receive the comments that we've received tonight and refer to staff. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. Well, that was a great conversation. Perfect. Here we are. It's 9:16, 1 minute over. Last thing is, may I have a motion to adjourn? Colin and Sam, and all those in favor? Opposed? That carries. All right, and before we leave, if Linda, if you don't mind, Ms. Bodas, if you could just tell everybody the date